Welcome back, deep divers. We're diving into something today that might feel, I don't know, maybe a little bit upside down. We're talking about achieving your dreams and wishes, but from a really counterintuitive
It
angle.
is a bit counterintuitive, right? Yeah. You always hear dream big or think positive,
Yeah.
visualize that success. I mean, think about it. You see it everywhere.
It's everywhere. Book like The Secret, all those inspirational chicken soup for the soul stories, they all preach the power of positive thinking.
They do. It's almost like it's ingrained in our culture.
Right. It's like Dr. Seuss telling us you've got brains in your head, feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself any direction you choose. Or President Eisenhower declaring that pessimism never won any battle. It's like this core idea that just focusing on a positive future will somehow, I don't know, magically pull us toward it.
Like a magnet.
Yeah. And yet, here's where it gets interesting. Research is actually suggesting that just letting your mind wander in those rosy future scenarios without really looking at the grittier realities can actually make you less likely to achieve those dreams.
It sounds crazy, right? But yeah, that's what the research is showing.
It's so wild. So, okay, let's really unpack this because I think this goes against what a lot of us have been told, growing up and throughout our lives. So, what's the catch? Why can those feel-good daydreams end up sabotaging us?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're going to explore why this happens, why dream it, wish it, do it maybe isn't the most effective strategy.
I love that. So, our mission is to kind of debunk this myth of just dreaming, right?
Yeah, we're going to dig into the science of human motivation. We're going to understand why simply dreaming isn't enough and how a dose of, I guess you could call it realism, can actually help us become both the dreamer and the doer.
Okay, I am so ready for this. Let's start by digging into this idea that there's a dip side to just pure dreaming, the unadulterated, just floating on a cloud dreaming. You mentioned that the pleasure of it can create this mental fulfillment. Can you give us some specific examples of how this plays out?
Absolutely. There's a study about college students who had crushes, but they weren't dating those people. And what they found was the more these students indulged in these fantasies about a relationship with their crush, the less likely they were to actually initiate anything, any kind of romantic interaction.
Wow. So it's almost like they got that hit of reward, that dopamine hit from the fantasy.
Exactly. And then it was like, okay, well, I've already kind of experienced that, so maybe I don't need to actually go through the effort of asking them out.
Like the brain was like, mission accomplished.
I've already succeeded. Yeah, it's really interesting. And they found a similar pattern with graduate students looking for jobs. They asked them to write down these positive fantasies about finding a job, nailing the interview, settling into a great new office, the whole 9 yards.
Like creating their dream job vision board, but just in their mind.
Exactly. And what they found was the students who had more positive fantasies about the job, they actually put in less effort in their job search. They spent less time applying, networking, really putting themselves out there.
Less motivated, less drive.
Totally. And they even found this pattern in academic performance. Students who fantasized about good grades, they actually scored lower and studied less than their peers.
So picturing that A+ didn't magically make it appear?
Nope, quite the opposite. And it gets even more interesting. They did a study with patients recovering from hip surgery. Some patients visualized a really quick and easy recovery, imagining themselves back on their feet, feeling fantastic.
Which you would think would be helpful.
Right. It seems intuitive.
Yeah.
But the physical therapists actually rated the patients who had these fantasies as showing less actual improvement.
Oh, wow. Less progress in their rehab.
Less progress. It was almost like their minds had already declared victory, so their bodies didn't quite get the memo about the hard work of physical therapy.
We're good, we're healed, we're moving on.
Right. And this even plays out on a larger scale. Research looking at presidential inaugural speeches throughout history found that more positive thinking, more optimism in the speeches was actually correlated with lower subsequent economic performance during their term.
So more presidential optimism, less actual economic progress. That's wild.
It really is. And this idea of the fantasy sort of fulfilling itself in our minds can show up in the workplace, too. Think about new product ideas, new projects.
Oh, yeah, I've seen this. Everyone's super excited in the brainstorming phase.
Exactly. The idea itself becomes so gratifying, so complete in their minds. And then the actual, often methy, difficult execution gets overshadowed.
They're basking in the glory of the idea. And the nitty-gritty of making it happen gets lost.
Totally. So it really paints this picture that untethered dreaming, while it feels good, can be a motivation killer in the long run.
It's a real paradox, isn't it? But then the question is, why is there this persistent cult of optimism in our society? It feels like we're bombarded with messages to just think positively.
It's everywhere, right? Advertising?
Yeah, advertising, politicians, even economists tracking things like consumer confidence.
Right. And we're told to avoid negative self-talk. And to get out of that negative thinking, if we want to achieve anything, it's all about focusing on the positive.
Like those posters with slogans like, believe you can and you're halfway there.
Exactly. And this pressure to be optimistic holds even when things are tough. Remember during the 2008 recession, there was this initiative called the Pepsi Optimism Project.
Yeah, I remember that.
Even then, a huge percentage of Americans said they believe in the power of optimism to get them through.
Like, even when facing economic hardship, they held onto this idea that positive thinking would lead to positive change.
Exactly. And years later, surveys were still showing most Americans tending to see the glass as half full and believing in the American dream.
So this belief in optimism is deeply embedded in our culture, it seems. But you mentioned it's not just an American thing.
Right. It's global. You think about quotes like Marcus Aurelius saying to dwell on the beauty of life, or Samuel Johnson saying that the habit of looking on the best side of everything is worth more than 1,000 a year.
It's woven into our literature, proverbs, sayings, like Eisenhower saying, pessimism never won any battle, or Chaplin, who said, you'll never find a rainbow if you're looking down.
Exactly. It's this underlying belief that focusing on a positive future will give us the strength to persevere and ultimately achieve our goals. But as we've seen, it's not that simple.
And there's that social pressure too, right? To be optimistic, to not be a Debbie Downer.
Absolutely. In workplaces, organizations, even entertainment, there's this push to be positive, even if it doesn't reflect our true thoughts.
You get labeled a pessimist, a naysayer.
Exactly. So we have this bias towards outward optimism, even if it doesn't always serve us in our personal goals. But you did mention that there is an upside to some dreaming. So is all positive thinking bad? Should we banish all positive thoughts about the future? No, not at all. It's more nuanced than that. Early psychologists, like Freud, actually had a pretty negative view of fantasies. He saw them as a way to cope with unpleasant realities.
A kind of unhealthy escape mechanism then.
Yeah, that's how he saw it. And this idea was further developed by neo-Freudians and the humanistic psychology movement, who basically said that only realistic, grounded thoughts were truly mentally healthy.
So the emphasis was on really being present, accepting things as they were, rather than escaping into the future?
Exactly. But more recent research has shown that positive fantasies can be valuable in certain situations, especially when taking action is impossible or delayed.
Okay, can you give us an example of a situation like that?
Let's think back to Rachel, the college student whose boyfriend was in jail. She couldn't do anything to change his sentencing or his legal situation, right?
Right.
But her positive fantasies about his sentencing, imagining herself and others speaking up for him, swaying the judge of those fantasies, helped her cope with the anxiety and to keep going during a time when she felt totally powerless.
So in that situation, the fantasy wasn't avoiding action, but it was a coping mechanism for an uncontrollable situation.
Exactly. And there's even more powerful examples of this. There's accounts from concentration camps where inmates facing horrific suffering and starvation found a way to cope by collecting and even arguing over their favorite recipes.
Wow, that's powerful. In those horrific conditions, they focused on something so seemingly ordinary.
Right. But it wasn't ordinary at all. It was a form of mental escape, a way to temporarily suppress their hunger, to transport themselves back to a world where those simple pleasures existed. It gave them a sense of hope, maybe even the will to survive.
Those fantasies became a lifeline, a way to maintain a sense of self in the face of dehumanization.
Absolutely. And this leads to the question of where these positive fantasies come from. Research suggests they arise from both unmet basic needs like thirst and higher order needs, like meaning in life.
Tell me more about that thirst study. That sounds fascinating.
Okay, so they asked the group of students to not eat or drink for 4 hours, then made some of them even thirstier with salty crackers. Then they asked them to imagine drinking a big glass of ice water. The thirstier they were, the more vivid and positive their fantasies were.
Their bodies were craving something, and their minds conjured up ways to satisfy that craving, even if it was just in their imagination.
Right, and they did a similar study with people in a government waiting room, subtly suggesting that work gives life meaning, but that some might be lacking that. Then they asked them to imagine acing a job interview. Guess what?
The people who felt that their lives lacked meaning had the most positive fantasies about the job interview.
You got it. It seems like when our basic needs are heightened or even threatened, we tend to fantasize more positively about fulfilling them.
Our minds are always searching for ways to meet those needs, even indirectly.
Exactly. And you mentioned earlier how fantasizing can help us stay in the game when we can't act directly. Think back to Rachel. Those fantasies helped her get through a really difficult... Wait, they gave her a sense of strength.
Yeah, like a mental distraction, a coping mechanism.
Exactly. And we see similar uses of visualization in PTSD treatment, where patients are encouraged to imagine a safe place.
So when we're in those situations that feel beyond our control, fantasizing about a positive outcome can be a really helpful tool to make it through, like waiting for test results or a big decision or anything like that.
Right. It can give us a sense of relief, some hope. But it's really important to emphasize that for serious illnesses like cancer, where taking action is possible and crucial, relying only on positive fantasies can be detrimental.
Because in those cases, action is still possible, and the fantasy could prevent someone from seeking treatment.
Exactly. But positive fantasies can also provide temporary relief from negative emotions, like sadness, depression, feelings of hopelessness,
A little mental break from the tough stuff.
Right. And maybe even more importantly, imagining future scenarios can help us explore different choices. Think about that medical student who was eating a cheeseburger and suddenly realized they didn't want to be a doctor after all.
Yeah, the cheeseburger epiphany. Imagining the day-to-day realities of the job helped them to see that it wasn't what they truly wanted.
Exactly. Or Jeannie, who was at work and had that fantasy of biking to a bistro with her son, and it helped her realize how much she valued spending quality time with him.
The fantasy illuminated what was really important to her.
Right. And here's a practical tip. Try writing down or recording your fantasies. This can help you see your thoughts and images more clearly and uncover your true wishes.
Great idea. So dreaming isn't always a bad thing. It can serve different purposes. But let's circle back to why simple dreaming often fails when we're trying to actually accomplish something.
Right, let's dive into the mechanics of it. One study looked at the fascination with high heels.
High heels. Okay, I'm intrigued, but what do shoes have to do with achieving dreams?
More than you'd think. Researchers asked women to fantasize about looking fabulous in high heels. Another group imagined the negative aspects of wearing them, like discomfort or pain. And they took their blood pressure readings before and after.
Okay, blood pressure. I see where this is going.
The woman who fantasized positively about the heels actually had a decrease in blood pressure, indicating less energy and motivation. The group that had imagined the negatives didn't have this decrease.
So the daydream actually calmed them down.
Exactly. And if your goal requires action, relaxation is not what you need. It kind of debunks the dream it, wish it, do it idea, because the dreaming can make you less likely to do.
Instead of psyching us up, our dreams are chilling us out.
Exactly. And there was another study where students read about a medication shortage in Sierra Leone. Some fantasized about the problem being solved, others didn't. Then they were given the chance to donate.
And the ones who fantasized donated less.
Yep, they donated less. It's like their minds experienced the positive outcome already, so they had less motivation to actually do something about it. And this brings up the question of whether positive fantasies might hinder our performance in other areas too.
Like driving or taking tests or doing complex tasks. If we're lost in daydreams, are we less present and focused when we need to be?
That's the idea. There was a study where students were told about an essay contest with a cash prize. Some were asked to fantasize about winning, and guess what?
They felt more relaxed.
Bingo, more relaxed. And this brings us to a really important concept called mental attainment. It's the idea that our minds can be tricked during positive fantasizing into feeling like we've already achieved the future.
Like we've already crossed the finish line.
Exactly. And that reduces our urge to work for it. Remember the high heels study. The women who fantasized positively were less likely to say they'd wear heels in the future.
It's almost like the fantasy fulfilled the desire, making the real thing less appealing.
Right. So if you're constantly fantasizing about your future, you might find yourself in a double bind. You get that relaxation and sense of attainment, which makes you less motivated.
But at the same time, your mind is locked into that specific vision, so you might miss other opportunities or information that could lead to success.
Exactly. It's like the man who dreams of winning the lottery, but never buys a ticket. Without action, it's just a dream.
Okay, so the key isn't to stop dreaming, but to find a more effective way to connect those dreams with real-world action. And this is where mental contrasting comes in, right?
Yes. Mental contrasting helps us pursue our dreams in a more grounded and ultimately more successful way.
Tell me more, tell me more.
So it starts with identifying a wish you have for the near future, something specific and important. Let's say your wish is to finally finish that creative project you've been putting off.
I like it. Relatable. Okay, what's next?
Next, you vividly imagine the best possible outcome of that wish. How would it feel to have it completed? What would the positive feedback be?
Okay, I'm picturing it now. The sense of accomplishment, the positive reactions from others.
Perfect. Now here's the contrasting part. Instead of just enjoying that vision, you identify the main internal obstacle that prevents you from achieving it. Something about you, your thoughts, feelings, habits, that gets in the way.
So not external factors, but my own internal barriers, maybe procrastination or the fear that it won't be good enough.
Exactly. It could be self-doubt, distractions, anything within yourself. This process of thinking about both the positive future and the negative reality is what makes it mental contrasting.
I'm starting to see the power in this already. Okay, so what happens when you do this?
Research shows that people who engage in mental contrasting feel more energized, more engaged, and they actually take more action towards their goals compared to those who only fantasize or only dwell on the negative.
So that contrast creates a spark, a motivation to overcome those hurdles.
Exactly. And it can also help you let go of wishes that are unlikely or impossible.
Like if you realize the obstacles are just too big, you can move on to something else.
Right. It's about being strategic. Like remember the aspiring violinist who lacked natural talent? Through mental contrasting, they might realize that pursuing basketball, where they have more natural ability, would be more fulfilling.
It's about being honest with ourselves and aligning our dreams with our abilities and the reality of the situation.
Exactly. You also mentioned Kevin's story about his web service that didn't succeed.
Yeah, he put so much time and energy into it, but it just didn't take off.
Right. Mental contrasting might have helped him see the obstacles, both external, like the tough market, and internal, like maybe a reluctance to adapt his vision and pivot to something else sooner.
It's not about giving up on dreams, but being wise about which ones to pursue.
Exactly. And there's a study about wanting to get to know an attractive person named Michael S. Women who had high expectations of meeting him and then did mental contrasting, were more eager to meet him, but also anticipated more disappointment if they didn't.
So it amplified their motivation, but also their potential disappointment.
Right. And the opposite happened for women with low expectations. Mental contrasting seemed to help them disengage from a wish that seemed out of reach.
So it helps us calibrate our effort based on a realistic assessment. It's amazing how this works on so many levels.
It is. And unlike positive fantasizing, which can decrease blood pressure, mental contrasting can actually increase it, suggesting a state of greater energization and readiness for action.
So it's not just a mental thing. There's a physical response too. And you mentioned this technique isn't just for adults. There was a study with elementary school students.
Yes. They found that mental contrasting improved their math performance. It increased their interest, their effort, and even reduced distractions.
Wow. So it can help kids focus and learn more effectively? That's incredible.
It is. And it can even help with things like asking for help, which can be really hard for some people.
Yeah, it's tough to be vulnerable and admit we need help. So how can mental contrasting help with that?
Well, practicing mental contrasting on a smaller, less emotionally charged wish can help build a more proactive mindset and confidence, which might make it easier to ask for help when needed.
So it's like building momentum, starting small, and then tackling those bigger challenges.
Exactly. And you mentioned some examples of individuals with seemingly huge obstacles. The shy person, the injured police officer, the student with math anxiety, the child afraid of the doctor.
Right, all facing different but significant challenges.
Mental contrasting can help them shift their perspective. The shy person might contrast their wish for connection with their fear of social interaction, leading them to take small steps. The injured officer could contrast their desire for a fulfilling career with their limitations, opening them up to new possibilities, and so on.
It's about breaking down big obstacles into smaller, more manageable steps.
Exactly. And there's research on overcoming fear of foreigners, too. Mental contrasting led to increased tolerance, willingness to connect, and even plans to interact with people from other cultures.
Wow, so it can even help with prejudice.
It can. And one of the best things about mental contrasting is that it's efficient. Studies have shown results in just 5 to 20 minutes.
5 to 20 minutes. That's amazing. Okay, so we've got this powerful tool, mental contrasting. But how do we make it a consistent part of our lives? That's where WOOP comes in, right?
Yes. Whoopie gives us a structured way to move from wishing to doing.
Okay, break it down for me.
Whoopie stands for wish, outcome, obstacle, plan.
Okay, I remember that. Let's go through each step.
The first step, wish, is about identifying a wish that's both feasible and important to you. You gave the example of Tammy, who wanted to spend more time with her family.
Right. She was overwhelmed by chores and wanted more quality time with her loved ones. What about the second step, outcome?
In this step, you vividly imagine the best possible outcome of your wish. Tammy imagined her family happily gathered around the dinner table, enjoying a meal and each other's company.
Really feeling that positive emotion of her wish being fulfilled.
Exactly. And the third step, obstacle, is about identifying your biggest internal roadblock. For Tammy, it wasn't just the chores, but the feeling of being overwhelmed, which led her to neglect her family time.
So it's about understanding the real root cause, not just the surface issue.
Right. And the final step, plan, is where you create an if-then statement to address that obstacle. For example, Tammy's plan was, if I start feeling overwhelmed by chores, then I'll immediately start preparing dinner.
So she's anticipating the obstacle and pre-planning a specific action to take.
Exactly. Whoop takes the power of mental contrasting and makes it practical, especially with that if-then plan. Research has shown its effectiveness in all sorts of areas, from health behaviors to task performance.
And you mentioned that there's a carryover effect.
Yes, it's fascinating. Engaging in mental contrasting for one wish can actually energize efforts in other areas of your life.
Yeah.
Like students who mentally contrasted about a test did better on the test and were more persistent in a separate task.
Wow, so it's like a ripple effect of motivation.
Right. And that if-then planning in Whoop is very similar to what's called implementation intentions.
Yeah, you mentioned a study with students writing holiday reports.
Yes, the students who made specific if-then plans about when and how they'd write their reports were much more likely to actually do it.
So it's like setting up a mental shortcut that links a trigger to an action.
Exactly. And remember Jim, who gets anxious talking to his manager, his plan could be, if I start feeling anxious, then I'll take a deep breath and remind myself of a recent success. Or the person in recovery struggling to write a resume, their plan could be, if I feel the urge to use, then I'll call my sponsor.
So powerful. Just having that plan in place can make such a difference.
It really can. So to recap the 4 steps of Whoop Whoop: wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. It's that simple.
Okay, I got it. Any other tips for making these if-then plans really effective?
Yes. Make sure the then part is a specific, goal-directed behavior that directly addresses the obstacle. And remember, Whoopie isn't just for people who are struggling. Even successful people can use it to overcome fears and reach their full potential.
That's a good point. It's a tool for everyone.
Exactly. And sometimes, just going through the first 3 steps, the mental contrasting part, can be helpful for decision-making.
So even without the plan step, it can help us gain clarity.
Exactly. And you mentioned spontaneous mental contrasting. While Whoop is intentional, we sometimes do this naturally, especially when we're sad or feel a strong need to act.
Like our brains are trying to problem solve, even unconsciously.
Exactly. But Whoop gives us a way to do it consciously and purposefully. And brain imaging studies have shown that mental contrasting is a unique brain process, different from just resting or fantasizing.
So it's not just a feel-good exercise, it's actually changing our brain activity.
That's fascinating. Now let's talk about Whoop in action. You mentioned its use in health and well-being, right? Whoop has shown amazing results in promoting healthy behaviors. One study with a German health insurance company had patients use Whoop for exercise and diet, and the results were fantastic.
Tell me more.
The group using Whoop had big increases in physical activity and fruit and vegetable intake. And get this, the dietary changes lasted for 2 years.
2 years. That's incredible. Long-term change is what we're all looking for, right?
Exactly. And what's cool is that Whoop doesn't try to change people's beliefs about health. It helps them act on their existing beliefs.
It's like it bridges that gap between knowing and doing.
Exactly. And it can also help with refraining from harmful actions. A study with college students showed that Whoop helped them reduce binge drinking.
So it's for stopping bad habits as well as starting good ones.
Yes. And it's been used for managing insecurity in relationships, too.
How so?
People used Whoop to create plans for staying positive and supportive when they felt insecure, which helps to improve the relationship.
That's brilliant. And you mentioned ongoing research on low P in other areas.
Yes. It's being studied for marathon runners, rowers, decision-making, loneliness, anxiety, and even major life changes. Because Whoop is content neutral, it can be used for almost anything.
It's like a universal tool for achieving goals and navigating life's challenges.
Exactly.
Okay, so for our listeners who are ready to try Whoop, what are your best tips for getting started and making it a habit?
The best advice is to just start experimenting. Try Whoop with different wishes, different times of day, different situations. See what works for you.
Make it your own.
Exactly. The more you practice the 4 steps, the more natural it will become. But when you're starting out, try to stick to the format. Wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. Be specific, be vivid in your imagination, and don't skip steps.
Got it. And you shared Ray's story about how Whoop helped him uncover his deeper wishes.
Yes, he started with a wish to lose weight, but realized his obstacle was emotional eating, which stemmed from loneliness. His plan was to find a surfing club to connect with others.
So his initial wish led to a deeper wish for connection.
Exactly. And then he used Whoop to overcome his shyness and actually connect with people at the club.
It's like a chain reaction of positive change. That's amazing.
It is. And remember, be patient. Don't get discouraged if you don't see results right away. It takes practice. And remember to acknowledge your accomplishments, even the small ones. And even if you're not sure Whoop was the reason.
Celebrate those wins no matter how small.
Exactly. And don't forget, even just the mental contrast on Art of Whoop can be helpful for making decisions. Thinking about the positive outcomes and internal obstacles for each option can give you a lot of clarity.
That's a great reminder. So to sum it all up,
Positive thinking alone isn't enough. We need to pair our dreams with a realistic understanding of our internal obstacles. Mental contrasting and Whoop are powerful tools to help us do just that.
it's about being both a dreamer and a doer, a hopeful optimist, and a grounded realist.
Exactly. Whoop is simple, safe, and incredibly effective.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to give Whoop a try. Start small, experiment, and see what positive changes you create in your own life.
And as a final thought, now that you understand the science of dreaming and doing, what's one small, maybe even hidden internal obstacle that you can confront today to start moving toward your most important wish?
Until next time, deep divers.
Keep dreaming, keep doing, and keep whooping.